Yeah, it's so beautiful. And what's coming up for me is, when we connected, I was very connected to my body through movement, through exercise. And I had been doing meditation for a while, but when in doing that, it was still a very heady activity for me. It was something that I wasn't bringing that same level of embodiment that I had during movement into the practice, into the cushion. And I think this is kind of touching on something that you kind of share a lot about. And so I think one way to orient it and hear about it is you have a bit of a beef with the term mindfulness.
Mm.
And I'd love to hear about, what's your beef with mindfulness?
I love the way you say it. A beef with mindfulness. Yeah, so let me start with authentic mindfulness practice is a gift to the world. It is a gift. It's when mindfulness is in its totality, in its true essence, where you're not only paying attention to thoughts and noting them, but also you're cultivating a warm heartedness and you're learning to be in your body. When all that is there, which is really there in original teachings of mindfulness, um, it's wonderful. Okay. So this is not a critique of authentic mindful practice. And let me add that that particular leg that I mentioned of being in touch with your feelings was really supported and helped when the Asian practices came to the United States, when Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg and some of the early people who had trained in India and Burma, because they were Western, particularly Jack as a psychologist, they brought the feeling, they feminized it in a very healthy way. Because still in the East, it was um, it wasn't about relationship. It wasn't about living life. These were monks practicing to get enlightened. So that's where it came from. Yeah. So what's my beef? So let's say it in two ways. There is the word mindfulness, which implicitly brings us to the mind. It's right there. Language is powerful. And most people practicing mindfulness think it's about stopping their thoughts, or at least noticing thoughts and thinking. That is one really essential element, important element, but really lopsided if we don't include what I like to call bodyfulness and heartfulness. If those three don't have kind of equal weight, a person gets distorted, in my view. So mindfulness implies that the work is about thought and thinking. And then, so that's the word, which I think gets misunderstood. And then I watch the application, as happens in the Western world when everything becomes part of the economic and capitalist system and it becomes popular, which is great, by the way. I love seeing mindfulness in businesses and, you know, mindful sales, you know, mindful workouts,
Oh yeah.
all good, all
Yeah.
good. But boy, it gets distorted because now it's becoming a way of doing something that was never intended. It's a way of creating a certain result in the world that is often self-serving.
Yeah.
And even mindful workouts, you can be mindfully working out, but still your body is not becoming more receptive, is not becoming bringing you closer to your where your feelings are living in your body. So there are ways in which Well, let me say it this way. You almost always, with psychologists, with of course, therapists, with coaches, mindfulness is always presented as positive, as great.
Mm,
And so I just want to point out the limitation of the word and the limitation of the way it's being practiced in many domains.
yeah. I can totally relate to that because when I first started meditating, there was a way I was using my mind to try to control and stop my mind,
Yeah.
right? Like in
Yeah.
gripping and concentrating and, trying to force the thoughts to be quiet and, all these things. Just, looking back now, a hilariously poor application. And in the same way, also like striving with that, right? I was so, wanted outcomes out of it and all these things. And so bringing just so much to the table that was frankly not useful.
Right. And well put. And for so many of us with Western, particularly US belief systems and ideologies, it's about self improvement. Well, how do you let go of self and be focused on self improvement? That whole sense of the way goals, which can be wonderful. I'm not against goals, but for certain psyches, most of us were raised with this kind of do it yourself, get going, pull yourself up. Not bad in itself, but when that gets applied to the inner development, it really goes off. I see a lot of people who've been meditating a long time, and it has mostly functioned to strengthen their sense of separation,
Mm,
their sense of isolation, their sense of I am here and the world is out there, because they've gotten so focused on their mental structure. I'll give you two examples that are kind of wild, very different examples. So back in 73, I lived for a while at a house in San Francisco, a New Dimensions house that was very kind of cutting edge, bringing over a lot of meditation teachers and connected to a radio station. That's where my wife Linda and I first lived together. We weren't married at the time. And my mother died. And one of the kind of leaders of the house, who had studied very long with Krishnamurti, who was very involved in paying attention to the moment, and he'd also done a lot of vipassana. As I was coming down the stairs to go to the airport to deal with the death of my mother, his way of approaching me was, "Well, what do you notice in your mind?" And what a what a question
mm,
for to be given to a 22-year-old kid whose mother just died, and kind of implying that that's where my consciousness should be, on what's going on in your mind.
mm,
So that's one crazy instance. Another one, back in '84, I was doing a retreat in India, in Bodh Gaya, where Buddha was enlightened. It was a Vipassana center with Munindra, who was an important teacher for many Americans. And we were sitting and being very mindful. It was a really important retreat for me. I learned a lot. And I noticed that as we went outside to do our walking meditation, it's like I was walking very precisely, very noticing. And I noticed in the field there were a bunch of young Indian men with buckets of rocks on their head as they were going. It was like a bucket or a kind of what are they? A basket on their head with lots of rocks, and they're walking because they're building a building next to the property. And they were walking with such elegance, such presence, such unintentional awareness.
Mm.
And I saw me, and I looked around and I saw how stiff and how manufactured our mindfulness was.
Yeah.
And that was also a clue that there was a certain and I'm not putting it down. It sounds like I'm putting it down. It has its place, but it's helpful to see the limitations. And every path has traps, and that's one there where you get very studied and you lose your spontaneity, you lose your naturalness. And I see that happen a lot in mindful when mindfulness goes off a bit.